Hey, listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. In the summer of 1565, the most powerful military force on Earth descended on a small limestone island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The Ottoman Empire, at the absolute peak of its power, commanding armies and navies that had shattered every opponent that they had faced for generations, sent roughly 40,000 soldiers and one of the largest naval fleets ever assembled to take Malta. Defending it, approximately 700 knights of St. John and perhaps 8,000 Maltese soldiers and civilians. The Ottomans expected the island to fall in just days. It held out for 4 months. What happened on that island in the summer of 1565 is one of the most remarkable stories in military history, and one of the most consequential battles most people have never heard of. Today's History Brief covers some recent history news. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On April 2nd, 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon first sighted Florida, claiming the land for Spain during his search for new territory. On April 2nd, 2005, Pope John Paul II died after more than 26 years as the head of the Catholic Church. His papacy spanned the Cold War and left a lasting influence on global religion and politics. Story of the day. To understand why Malta mattered so much at this time, we have to actually understand the world of 1565. So let's start there. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent had been expanding for decades into the Balkans, across North Africa, deep into the Middle East. Suleiman had besieged Vienna in 1529. He had conquered Rhodes in 1522, driving out the very knights of St. John who would now hold Malta. The Mediterranean was becoming an Ottoman lake, you might say. Christian Europe, fractured, politically divided, perpetually at war with itself, was struggling to hold the line. Malta sat at the geographic center of all of this. The island controlled the narrow channel between the eastern and western Mediterranean. Whoever held Malta had the key to the sea lanes of an entire civilization. Suleiman understood this perfectly. He wanted the island, and he wanted the knights gone permanently. The Knights of St. John were not ordinary soldiers, I should say that. They were a crusading military order with roots stretching back to the 11th century. Warrior monks who had spent 4 centuries fighting on the frontiers of Christendom. After losing Rhodes to Suleiman in 1522, they had been effectively homeless for 7 years before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V granted them Malta in 1530. It was not a generous gift. Malta was rocky, arid, largely barren, and strategically exposed. Charles V reportedly gave it to them partially because no one else wanted it. The knights took it anyway, and spent the next 35 years turning it into a fortress. Their grand master in 1565 was John Percival de Valette. He was 70 years old. He had spent his entire adult life fighting the Ottomans. He had been captured by them once and spent a year as a galley slave before being ransomed. He had no illusions about what was coming or what defeat would mean. The Ottoman fleet arrived on May 18th, 1565. What followed was not a battle as much as a sustained act of destruction conducted at close quarters over 4 months of savage fighting. The Ottomans opened with a massive bombardment of Fort St. Elmo, a small outpost guarding the entrance to the Grand Harbor. By the military calculations of the day, St. Elmo should have fallen in days, but it held for 31. The knights inside knew that they were going to die. They knew no relief was coming in time. But they held anyway, buying weeks that Valette used to reinforce the main defenses. When St. Elmo finally fell on June 23rd, the Ottomans had lost somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 men, taking a fort the size of really just a city block. The Ottoman commander Mustafa Pasha, surveying his losses, reportedly looked across the harbor at the much larger fortifications that were still defending Malta and said, "If so small a son has cost us so dear, what price shall we have to pay for so large a father?" What came next was worse. The Ottomans turned their full force on the remaining fortifications. Fort St. Michael and the town of Birgu, where Valette had established his headquarters. The bombardment was relentless. Estimates suggest the Ottomans fired somewhere between 130,000 and 150,000 cannonballs into the Maltese defenses over the course of the siege. The walls crumbled, the defenders bled. Disease and wounds reduced the garrison to a fraction of its original strength. At one point, the Ottoman forces actually breached the walls and poured into Birgu itself. Valette, 70 years old as I mentioned, was in full armor there to meet them, personally leading the counterattack into the breach. He was wounded by a grenade fragment, but he kept fighting, and the breach was sealed. By August, the defenders were down to perhaps a few hundred men capable of bearing arms. The Maltese civilians, men, women, elderly, had joined the defense. Valette ordered the heads of captured Ottoman soldiers fired from the cannons into the enemy lines, a brutal psychological message that the knights had no intention of negotiating. The Ottomans pushed harder, though, and then on September 7th, 1565, after nearly 4 months of siege, the relief force finally arrived. A Spanish and Sicilian fleet carrying several thousand fresh troops landed on the island. The Ottoman commanders, exhausted, decimated, and running short of supplies as the Mediterranean autumn approached, made the decision to withdraw. They re embarked their battered forces and sailed away. Malta had held. The news of the victory spread across Europe with extraordinary speed. In London, special church services were held in Thanksgiving. In Rome, the Pope ordered celebrations. In Madrid, Philip II of Spain, who had been criticized for the slowness of the relief expedition, understood immediately what had been preserved. Voltaire, writing 2 centuries later, put it simply and precisely: "Nothing is better known than the siege of Malta." He was right then. He is, however, less right now, which is one of history's quiet injustices. The Great Siege of Malta did not end the Ottoman Empire threat to Europe. The struggle continued for decades, but it did break something in the myth of Ottoman invincibility. It demonstrated that the empire's momentum could be stopped, that a small, determined force, properly led and willing to pay an almost unimaginable price, could hold against the greatest military power of the age. Valette survived the siege by 3 years, dying in 1568. The city the knights built to replace the shattered fortifications was named after him. Valletta, the capital of Malta today, is his monument. It was built by the survivors of a siege that, by every rational calculation, they should not have survived. But obviously they did. On a small limestone rock in the middle of the sea against the greatest empire on earth, they held, and you might say Europe held with them. The History Brief. Today, on some history news, we're heading to ancient Rome, where one of the world's most iconic landmarks is getting a subtle but powerful upgrade, one that helps visitors see the Colosseum as the Romans once did. For centuries, the Colosseum has stood as a symbol of imperial power and spectacle. But what most visitors today don't realize is that the structure as we see it today is actually missing a major part of its original design. Thousands of years ago, crowds didn't just stream directly into the amphitheater. Outside its southern wall stood two massive arcades. supported by towering columns that reached up to 164 feet high, creating a shaded, bustling gathering space before spectators actually entered the arena. But over time, earthquakes and unstable ground caused those columns to collapse. Their absence left a gap not just in the architecture, but in our understanding of how a coliseum once functioned. Now, a new project is bringing that lost space back to life. Architects and archaeologists have completed a years long effort to install travertine marble slabs in a newly designed piazza, placed exactly where the original columns once stood. These slabs don't rebuild the columns by any means, but they do something arguably more powerful. They trace their actual footprint, allowing visitors to then visualize the immense scale and proportions of the original arcades. In fact, the marble used comes from the same type of quarry that supplied stone for the Colosseum itself, tying the modern intervention directly to its ancient origins. The space also includes engravings of Roman numerals, just like those that once guided spectators to their assigned seating sections nearly 2,000 years ago. According to the project's designers, the goal wasn't to just rebuild the past, but to help people experience that past. Visitors can now walk, sit, and gather in a space that mirrors how ancient Romans would have approached the arena before entering its gates. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. I hope you guys check out our new YouTube channel where I started a new series exclusive to YouTube called 25 Moments That Made America. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.